My name is Kazaya, and this year, my parents went as far as to attack me with a champagne bottle at my brother's birthday party. The reason? I wouldn't give them the deed to my $450,000 condo. But that wasn't the worst part. By then, they had already erased me from every family photo, tried to sell my home without informing me, and when I fought back, they made a video labeling me the traitor. I never thought that justice would look like an empty house or a folded napkin left behind, but perhaps that's what happens when silence speaks louder than loyalty. It was a warm Sunday evening in San Antonio, the kind where twilight stretched long across the driveway with oleanders blooming in the summer air. I pulled up to my parents' house, feeling out of place in my simple Toyota sedan. It sparkled clean and new, but next to the BMWs and Teslas lined up in front of the cul-de-sac, it looked wildly out of place. I stepped out of the car and brushed off the imaginary dust from my navy dress. No designer labels, no statement jewelry, just clean lines and a tiny pearl stud I'd kept since college. I clutched a neatly wrapped gift in my hands, a monogrammed pen set for Lazaro, and walked toward the front porch, where laughter spilled out like champagne. The celebration for Lazaro's 40th birthday was more extravagant than any wedding I had ever attended. String lights zigzagged across the yard, live jazz hummed softly in the background, and the aroma of cedar-planked salmon filled the air. Inside, a young man in a tight vest and fitted slacks stood at a podium with a guest list. He smiled politely as I walked up. "Name?" he asked. "Kazaya Reynolds," I said, adjusting the gift bag in my hand. He glanced down at the sheet, then paused, his finger trailing down the list. "You're listed as +1 under the Reynolds family block." I blinked, feeling confused. "Sorry, what?" He turned the paper around and showed me. There it was, carefully printed. Reynolds family, followed by individual names: Lazaro, Delora, Orville, Thessaly, even cousin Maxine and her 3 kids. Then, at the bottom, in smaller font, +1, guest of family. I forced a smile. Guess I'm the lucky +1. He looked uncertain. "Would you like a different tag? I can handwrite it." "No, it's fine," I replied quickly. I pinned the generic badge onto my dress, right over my heart. It tugged at the fabric, slightly off-center. I moved through the house, nodding and greeting guests who ignored me just enough to remind me that I was out of orbit here. The ballroom doors were wide open. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like floating planets, casting diamonds of light across tables covered in silk. I scanned the place cards. My seat was near the back. Table 18. I walked slowly toward it, heels tapping softly against the polished marble floor. Table 18 was tucked behind a thick pillar, right next to the kitchen door where servers came and went, clinking trays and occasionally shouting, "Hot plate!" The seat was slightly off-center, the silverware crooked, and the napkin folded into a limp swan, drooping as though it had given up halfway through the evening. I reached to adjust it, pausing as the paper-thin wing fluttered slightly under the air from the swinging kitchen door. I sat down and exhaled. From my vantage point, I could barely see the head table, but I could hear everything. The laughter, toasts, and the pop of another champagne bottle. Lazaro was being hailed from every direction. "Our golden boy!" someone shouted as a woman in stilettos leaned over to kiss his cheek. Delora stood beside him, beaming with practiced grace, as she introduced him to different guests. "This is our son," she repeated over and over. "He just made regional VP in 4 years. Isn't that something?" No one noticed me. Orville, my father, did glance over once, caught my eye across the crowd, offered a slow nod, just acknowledgement that I existed, then turned back to speak with his business partner. I picked up the water glass and sipped slowly, letting the chill anchor me. My hand brushed against the sad little swan again, crumpled and lonely on the fine china. Maybe they had just forgotten to list me properly. Maybe someone mixed up the chart. Or maybe, just maybe, I was never meant to stand out here. As the evening progressed, I tried to keep myself composed. I watched the celebration unfold like a film I wasn't part of. The spotlight was on Lazaro, as always. My family didn't even glance my way, except for Orville, who gave me that half nod, the kind you give someone when you're not sure if you should acknowledge them. But his indifference was nothing compared to Delora's false smiles. Her attention never strayed far from Lazaro, and every conversation I overheard seemed to circle back to him. At some point, the room began to feel smaller, and I knew it wasn't just because I was seated near the kitchen door. The air was thick with superficial compliments, but there was a heaviness to it, a strange unease. I felt like a ghost at my own family's celebration. I'd helped build this life for them, but when it came time to celebrate, I was a mere footnote, a +1 guest in my own home. Then came the moment I had never anticipated, the moment when everything I had been quietly dreading revealed itself to be true. The applause faded, and a server leaned over to clear the seat beside me. The space had remained empty all night, and it looked as though it was waiting for someone who wasn't coming. "That one taken?" she asked, gesturing to the vacant seat. "No, it's all yours." I replied with a smile that felt like a mask slipping into place. The clinking of forks on glasses grew louder as the lights dimmed slightly. The spotlight shifted toward the stage. The microphone screeched, and then someone familiar spoke into the system, the sound carrying throughout the room. And now, a few words from someone very special to us. "Please welcome Kazaya Reynolds." My heart skipped a beat. My name echoed through the speakers, but not the way I had hoped. The applause was trailing off when I stood, hesitant and confused. Why was I being called forward? I hadn't prepared anything. I didn't know what they expected from me. My body moved before my mind caught up, and I walked toward the stage, trying to ignore the nervous thumping in my chest. As I walked, Delora gave me a polished smile. It wasn't warm, just an obligatory gesture. Lazaro nodded at me from the main table, but his eyes seemed distant, lost in the excitement around him. Thessaly, his wife, sat beside him, perfectly posed as usual. Orville sat with one arm draped behind Delora's chair, his expression that of a man watching a show he already knew the ending to. I reached the mic, waiting for someone to hand me a script, a cue card, anything to help me make sense of why I was there. But nothing came. Then, the screen behind me flickered to life. A video montage started rolling, a highlight reel of Lazaro's life. I was familiar with every shot. A young Lazaro in Little League, a teenager at a science fair, graduation photos, shots of him shaking hands with the mayor, his first architecture project. The narration began. Delora's voice filled the air. From the very beginning, Lazaro was destined for greatness. He was the light in every room, our foundation, our pride. Orville's voice joined in. We always knew he had that spark, the kind of brilliance you can't teach. It's born in you. I stood still, my jaw tight. My fingers gripped the edges of the podium, my breath shallow. The video continued, showcasing Lazaro's achievements, his success. But not once did they mention me. Not once did they acknowledge the $75,000 loan I had wired him during his startup years, or the weekends I helped him rebuild client decks when his software crashed. Not a word about the nights I slept on the floor of his half-built showroom to keep the contractors on schedule. There was no trace of me in the narrative they had carefully curated for the crowd. I had been erased, edited out of my own family's history. The video ended with a splash of gold cursive, a legacy in the making. The applause was polite, some people clapping more enthusiastically than others. I nodded faintly, laughed, pretending it didn't feel like my life was being overshadowed, rewritten, and erased in front of me. Delora rose from her seat, clapping as she approached me. "And now," she said brightly, a few words from the ever-thoughtful little sister. I blinked, taken aback. So, this was it. A staged performance. A speech they hadn't prepared me for, and one they were now expecting me to deliver. My heart beat faster, but I walked toward the mic anyway, glancing down at my dress. My hands were sweating, and I could feel the weight of every eye on me. The room was watching, expecting. I leaned into the mic, trying to steady my voice. "It's a beautiful night," I began, my words measured. "And Lazaro, you've always had a gift for making the room light up around you." That's when Delora interrupted me. "Oh, honey, tell them," she said with a laugh, as if we were all in on the same joke. "Wouldn't it be the perfect gift if you handed them the condo key tonight?" The room stilled. I felt the air freeze. Every set of eyes locked onto me, waiting. I looked at Delora, trying to make sense of her words. What was she saying? Was this some kind of joke? Her smile was sharp. "You know, the place in Austin, the 2-bedroom condo you've got? You're always traveling for work, and Lazaro and Thessaly are newlyweds. It just makes sense." I couldn't breathe. I felt the world shift under my feet. Orville chimed in from his seat, voice booming as always. Come on, Kez. It's just a formality. You don't need all that space. It's not like you're using the guest room. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a demand. A calculated move designed to leave me no room for refusal without making me look ungrateful. I couldn't respond right away. I just stared at them, my mind racing. This wasn't a request. This was manipulation at its finest. My voice, when it came, was sharper than I expected. This wasn't agreed on. The room fell silent as Delora interrupted me. Oh, honey, tell them. Wouldn't it be the perfect gift if you handed them the condo key tonight? The room went still. I stared at her, confused and angry. This wasn't agreed on, I said into the mic. Delora dismissed it, smiling like everything was a joke. Don't be dramatic, sweetie. It's just a gesture, a symbol of love. Orville chimed in. Come on, Kez. It's just paperwork. You don't need all that space. I felt the pressure building in my chest, my voice growing sharper. This isn't about space. It's about control. I closed the envelope they handed me, setting it down gently on the coffee table. I'm not signing anything. Not now. Not ever. I turned to leave, walking past Lazaro, who was glued to his plate. No one stopped me. No one said a word as I walked out of the house. The door clicked shut behind me, and I felt the weight of their expectations lift off my shoulders. I didn't feel the rush of pain, not as much as I thought I would. Instead, there was this odd, numb clarity as I sat in the emergency room, the sterile air swirling around me. The nurse was pressing gauze to my head, her movements gentle, almost sympathetic. But I wasn't sure she really cared. She'd seen this before. Women showing up alone, their lives fractured in ways that didn't always involve physical injury. As I sat there, trying to steady my breath, a thought started to form in my mind. This was the last time I would ever allow them to hurt me, not just physically, but emotionally. For so many years, I had allowed myself to be the scapegoat, the one they leaned on whenever things got hard. But now, I understood. I wasn't just their backup. I was their prisoner, silently trapped in their web of manipulation. By the time I got back to Leah's place that night, everything ached. My scalp throbbed with each heartbeat, a reminder of how fast everything had unraveled. She had left the guest room light on, a soft towel beside the bed, and a warm mug of chamomile tea on the dresser, but I didn't touch any of it. I just sank into the sheets, my shoes still on, and closed my eyes. Not to sleep, not to rest, but to shut out the memory of glass clinking and the judgmental eyes that watched me as I walked away. Morning came too soon, the light filtering through the linen curtains, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. But as soon as I turned my head, the dull throb in my skull reminded me. I reached for my phone, which had been buzzing with notifications. Dozens of them. None from my family. Not one. Not even Lazaro, who could have at least pretended to care. There were messages from old coworkers and acquaintances who had seen the clip online. Someone had uploaded it. A shaky recording. A gasp from the crowd. My body stumbling sideways with blood blooming at my temple. The video was brief but enough to show the whole scene. The champagne bottle swinging, my body jerking backward. I pressed delete over and over, but my hands were shaking too much. It wasn't the video that was making me tremble. It was the weight of it all. How far they would go to destroy me without a second thought. I tried to go through the motions of my day. I showered, wincing every time I tilted my head. I brushed my teeth, feeling the cold of the toothpaste bite into my gums. Then I reached into my purse to grab my apartment key, just a simple mental exercise to make sure I was still grounded, still in control. But as I pulled everything out of my bag, something was off. My wallet was there, my phone, my lip balm, the half-eaten protein bar from last week, but the spare condo key wasn't. I searched my bag again, emptying everything onto the bed. Nothing. And that's when it hit me. A week ago, after a family dinner in Westlake, Orville had grabbed my bag by mistake, or so he said. I thought it was your mother's, he'd shrugged when he handed it back to me with a sheepish grin. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. But now it was clear. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I hadn't been imagining it. They had taken it. They had taken everything. The phone buzzed again, startling me. It was an unknown number. I answered on instinct more than curiosity. Hi, Miss Kazaya. This is Jeanette from HomeQuest Realty. Just confirming our 2 p.m. appointment for the walkthrough today at your condo. We'll meet at the entrance unless you prefer to use the lockbox. My stomach dropped. I didn't schedule anything, I said, my voice tight, unsure of what was happening. Jeanette sounded confused, flipping through something on her end. It's scheduled under your name, but a Mr. B. Orville Sullivan is listed as the co-signer. The listing account is under your property title. I couldn't breathe. I had never listed my condo. I had never agreed to any walkthrough. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Jeanette's voice came back, softer this time. Would you like to cancel the showing? I hung up before I could even process what was happening. I sat there, the phone in my hand, my heart racing. All I could do was sit at the edge of the bed, clutching the sheets, feeling the cold seep into my skin. They didn't just want to humiliate me. They were trying to erase me, piece by piece, starting with my home. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady, and walked to my laptop. The cursor blinked at me, daring me to act. My fingers hovered above the keys before I opened a new email to Marlo, the lawyer I had met briefly last fall at a networking event. Hi, Marlo, I typed quickly. We met briefly last fall at the networking brunch, and I'm hoping you remember me. I think my parents are trying to steal my home. I don't have proof yet, but I just received a call from a realtor about a walkthrough I never scheduled. They have a key I didn't authorize. Can we talk? Kazaya Sullivan. I hit send, then grabbed my coat. By noon, I was standing outside my condo in East Austin with a locksmith. The sun beat down on my neck, hot and unrelenting, but I barely felt it. The locksmith, a man in coveralls, nodded toward the doorknob. Someone's been in and out, he said, his voice low. The scratches are fresh, like they didn't know exactly where the key went. Can you change the locks? I asked, my voice flat. Absolutely, he replied. Want to add a deadbolt too? I nodded. I stood against the wall in the hallway as the locksmith worked. My eyes traced the fine scratches near the handle. It wasn't a break-in. There were no signs of brute force, just access. Familiar access, the kind that made your skin crawl. I didn't sleep much that night. The locksmith had left around 8, and I sat on the couch in silence. The faint smell of metal and lubricant still lingered in the air. The weight of what had just happened pressed on me like a vice. I reheated some leftover soup, but barely touched it. I tossed and turned for hours, thoughts racing through my mind like a whirlpool I couldn't escape. When morning came, I reached for my phone, almost unwilling to check it. The notifications buzzed continuously beside me. Dozens of messages lit up the screen, but none of them were from my family. No one from my family had reached out to ask if I was okay. Not Lazaro, not Delora, not Orville. No one. The messages were from people who had seen the video, the one of me being struck in front of everyone. I didn't need to watch it to know what it contained. A shaky recording, gasps from the crowd, my body stumbling sideways as blood started to bloom at my temple. I pressed delete on each notification as my hands shook. I couldn't bear to watch it, but each new message made my heart sink deeper into an abyss I wasn't sure I could escape. I tried to go through my morning routine, shower, brush my teeth, but everything felt disconnected. I went through the motions, but my mind was somewhere else, lost in the storm of realizations crashing down on me. Then, as I reached into my purse to grab my apartment key, I noticed something was off. My wallet, phone, lip balm, all there, even the half-eaten protein bar from last week. But the spare condo key? Gone. I emptied the entire contents of my bag, piece by piece. No key. It was then that the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. A week ago, after a family dinner in Westlake, Orville had grabbed my bag by mistake, or so he claimed. He had handed it back to me with that familiar, sheepish grin and said, "Thought it was your mother's." At the time, I hadn't thought twice about it, but now, in the silence of my apartment, the truth was clear. They had taken the key. I grabbed my phone, trembling as I scrolled through the contacts. I didn't want to call Marlo. I didn't want to get anyone else involved, but I had no choice. I dialed his number. "Hi, Marlo, it's Kazaya. I need help," I said when he picked up. "I'm listening," he replied, his voice calm and measured. "As always." "I think my parents are trying to steal my condo," I said. My voice sounded distant, like I was speaking from somewhere far away. I never listed it, but someone just called from a real estate company about a showing. It's scheduled under my name, but Orville is listed as the co-signer. There was a long pause before Marlo spoke. I can help. Let's get to the bottom of this. He gave me the next steps. Contact a locksmith, change the locks, gather all the paperwork. I had done so much for them. Loans, payments, support, but none of it mattered. This was the moment where I had to make the choice. Continue letting them walk all over me, or fight back and reclaim the life they had stolen from me. At noon, I was standing outside my condo in East Austin, the sun beating down on my neck. The locksmith arrived, a quiet man in coveralls who didn't ask questions. He simply nodded at the door and began working. As he replaced the locks, I stood still, my mind on autopilot. The scratches near the door handle were fresh, too fresh. Someone had been here, had been in and out, but there was no sign of forced entry. The door had just been unlocked. Familiar access. Casual access. The sickening realization hit me again. My family didn't just want control over my property. They wanted me to disappear, to give it all up, to let them erase me completely. The locksmith finished his work and asked if I wanted to add a deadbolt. I nodded, too tired to argue. I had already given so much. I wasn't going to give them more. As the locksmith packed up his tools and left, I stayed behind, staring at the door. I had already given them a lifeline, saved their home when it was in danger of foreclosure, covered their debts when they asked. But they had turned it all into a noose. I knew that this was it. There was no going back now. The next step would be a legal one. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my condo, the walls closing in around me. The stillness of the space, the silence that had once felt like peace, now felt suffocating. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend that my family's actions hadn't shaken me to my core. Then my phone buzzed again, and I glanced down at the screen. An email from Delora. "Let's talk, Kazaya. We love you. This has gone far enough. Please come by the house this afternoon. Just us. Let's fix this." I stared at the message, unsure of how to respond. Was this real? Was this some kind of bait? My heart pounded in my chest as I considered it. Maybe they wanted to make things right. Maybe they had finally seen the damage they had done. Or maybe this was just another game, another manipulation, another act to make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. I knew what I had to do. I drove to their house in Westlake. The front lawn was manicured, pristine, as it always had been. It looked like it belonged in a magazine. The air around the house felt off, like everything was rehearsed, scripted. Delora opened the door before I could knock, her arms already outstretched, ready to pull me in. "Kazaya, baby," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Thank you for coming." I stepped inside. The living room was staged, fresh orchids on the coffee table, lemon tea set out with my favorite shortbread cookies, framed photos of the family I had once belonged to. But there was no real comfort in it, no sense of belonging. Delora sat me down in the plush chair I used to sit in during Christmas. "We want to make things right," she said, smiling, but there was something cold in her eyes. I looked around, the warm lighting, the familiar objects that once represented home. But they no longer did. This wasn't home anymore. This was a facade. A show. And I wasn't going to play along. Orville emerged from the hallway, holding a manila envelope. He handed it to me, his expression unreadable. "We've been thinking," he began smoothly. "We want to keep things fair. No more misunderstandings." I opened the envelope slowly. The words deed transfer agreement stared back at me in bold letters. My chest tightened as I flipped through the paper, my fingers trembling slightly. The words on the page blurred as my mind raced to comprehend what they were asking. Deed transfer agreement. They wanted me to sign over my condo. They were trying to take everything I had left, the one thing that still felt like mine, and make it theirs. "This is theft," I whispered, my voice quiet but firm. I could feel the weight of their gaze on me, but I didn't let it break my resolve. Delora's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "It's just paperwork, sweetheart," she said, folding her hands in her lap, the picture of patience and calm. "You don't need all that space. It's not like you're using the guest room anyway." Orville added, his tone smooth, as if this was just a casual conversation. "You're not even reading it, Kazaya. Don't you trust us?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "This isn't about trust," I said, my voice rising slightly. "This is about control. You want me to hand over the last thing I have, the one thing that makes me feel like I matter, like I exist in this family. You want me to disappear." They both stared at me, unmoving, but I could see the cracks starting to form. This wasn't the first time I had been invisible to them, but it would be the last. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. Not without a fight. I closed the envelope slowly, my hand trembling as I set it back on the coffee table. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "Not now, not ever." Orville's mouth twitched in irritation, but he didn't speak. Delora just stared at me, her face a mask of frustration and disappointment. Lazaro hadn't said a word yet, but I could feel his presence in the room. He was watching me, but it wasn't out of concern or love. It was the same way he always watched me, like I was an obstacle, something that didn't belong in the story he was trying to tell. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to be a pawn in their game, a sacrifice on the altar of their comfort and greed. "I'm done," I said, my voice clear, cutting through the tension in the room. This is not a family. This is a business transaction, and I'm not playing along anymore." Delora's eyes flashed, her mouth tightening, but she didn't stop me as I turned to walk toward the door. Orville just watched me, his arms crossed, his expression hard as stone. Lazaro didn't even look up. I stepped out of the house, the door closing softly behind me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. It wasn't relief, not exactly. It was something deeper, something colder. I had finally made my choice. I got into my car, the engine purring to life as I pulled away from the house I had spent so many years trying to hold together. But now it was just a building, a hollow shell of what once was. The air around me felt clearer, lighter. I wasn't the one carrying the burden anymore. I wasn't the one who had to fix everything for them. That night, I sat in my condo, the silence almost suffocating. But it wasn't the kind of silence that crushed you. It was the kind that freed you. I didn't have to wait for another call from Delora, another demand for money from Orville. I didn't have to worry about Lazaro and his endless expectations. I didn't owe them anything anymore. Then, the next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Marlo, my lawyer. "Kazaya, I've filed the notice to vacate. It's official. They have 72 hours to leave." I stared at the message, the words sinking in. I wasn't going to fight them. I wasn't going to shout at them or make a scene. I had done enough of that already. This wasn't a moment for drama. It was the final step in breaking free from the chains they had wrapped around me for so long. Later that day, I drove down to the courthouse to finalize everything. The paperwork was all set. I had signed the final documents, filed them with the court, and now there was no going back. The sheriff would serve the eviction notice, and they would have to leave. No more pretending. No more playing the part of the obedient daughter. The house, the one I had tried so hard to keep intact, was no longer my responsibility. 3 days later, the eviction notice was served. I didn't see it happen, but Lazaro posted a video to our family group chat. The footage was shaky, showing Orville standing in his bathrobe with a piece of toast in hand, blinking at the officer. Delora stood behind him, her mouth frozen mid-sip. The officer handed the notice, and Orville slapped it against the wall in frustration. Delora stiffened, but neither of them moved toward me. I watched the video twice, then closed the app. There was no sense of triumph, just emptiness. The silence around me felt peaceful, and for the first time I felt no need to prove anything to them. The next day, I got a message from Thessaly. "They've done worse than you know." She attached a picture of a family photo album. As I scrolled through the pages, I realized I had been erased. No photos of me, no memories of shared moments. It wasn't just neglect. They had intentionally removed me from their lives. Her text followed. "They've been erasing you for years, even from memory." It hit me hard. I hadn't just been overlooked. I had been written out of the story. I typed a reply. "Thank you for showing me what I always felt but couldn't prove." Later, I received a message from my uncle Marvin, offering support. "Saw the folder. About time someone told the truth. If you need a witness, I'm here." I didn't respond immediately. Maybe it wasn't too late to rebuild the bridges, but for the first time, I didn't feel desperate to do so. I had already reclaimed my peace. I woke up the next morning to a strange stillness. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from an absence of noise, but from a kind of peace you fought for and finally earned. The sun filtered through the blinds in soft rays, casting gentle shadows across the floor of my condo. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down on me. I stood up, stretched, and made myself a cup of black tea. As the hot liquid warmed my hands, I thought about everything that had happened. The eviction notice, the video, the silence, the family I had tried so desperately to hold together, only to realize they had never truly seen me. Not the way I had seen them. I didn't feel bitterness anymore, not the fiery anger that had once consumed me. No, now I felt something else, something quieter, yet stronger. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of freedom, true freedom, the kind that doesn't come from a gesture or a document, but from within. I sat at my kitchen table, the napkin I had found earlier still folded in front of me. The swan-shaped napkin, the one I had straightened at the party that night, was now a symbol of something I had reclaimed. Not just the condo, not just my dignity, but my identity, my presence, my space in the world. It wasn't about proving a point anymore. It was about recognizing my worth. Later that afternoon, I received another message, this time from my Uncle Marvin, my mother's older brother. He was the one person in the family who had always been kind to me, even when the others ignored me or treated me like I was invisible. His text was simple, but the weight of it was undeniable. Saw the folder. About time someone told the truth. If you need a witness, I'm here. I stared at the message, the offer of support ringing in my ears. Maybe it wasn't too late to rebuild some of the bridges that had been burned. Maybe it wasn't too late for me to stand on my own terms and show the world, my family included, that I didn't need their approval. Not anymore. I didn't reply right away. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say. Maybe there was still some part of me that wanted to believe in the possibility of reconciliation, the idea that family could somehow come together despite the distance. But for the first time, I didn't feel desperate for it. I didn't need them to see me. I had already found the most important thing. I saw myself. I went through an old storage bin that had been gathering dust in the back of my closet. Tucked beneath a faded college t-shirt was my own photo album from high school. I hadn't looked at it in years. I opened it slowly, letting the memories wash over me. There I was, smiling awkwardly in old prom photos, holding up trophies at school events, captured in moments of triumph that felt so distant now. And there it was, the sticky note from my dad, scrawled in his handwriting. Kez, knew you had it in you. Proud of you, kid. I closed the album slowly, then set it aside. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger or sorrow. I just felt at peace. For the first time in a long while, I could see the pieces of my past without letting them define me. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I invited Amina over for dinner. She arrived 15 minutes late, arms full, a bottle of wine in one hand and a tiny orchid in the other. "You need more green in here," she said, setting the orchid by the window like it belonged. We ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing. Work, books, a show she swore I'd love, and I swore I'd never start. There was no tension, no underlying unspoken truths. We just existed together in the quiet rhythm of our own lives. As I looked down at the table, I saw the swan-shaped napkin, now slightly faded from the passage of time. It wasn't perfect. The creases weren't as sharp as they once had been. But it was mine. It had been mine all along. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who folded napkins for family dinners, hoping they would notice her, hoping they would care. I thought about the woman I had become, strong, quiet, and no longer begging for a place at the table. I raised my glass, clinking it with Amina's. "To building our own tables," I said. She smiled and agreed, the sound of our glasses ringing out like a promise between us. I had learned that sometimes the deepest wounds come not from strangers, but from the people we love the most. And sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is walk away from the people who raised you in order to protect your soul. That night, I didn't think about what they had lost. I thought about what I had reclaimed, not just property, not just dignity, but my voice, my presence, my identity. And I knew, without a doubt, that nothing they had tried to take from me could ever touch that again.